Well, hello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. This is our first presentation of a new group of podcasts we're going to be doing that is on the history of Marvel comics. And so we're just going to kind of jump in at the very first of Marvel comics and then present them chronologically. Each week that we present a new episode of this, we'll cover a new month of Marvel comics. And I was going to start with Fantastic Four, which is where everybody usually thinks Marvel Comics starts. But essentially, their first superhero comic was the introduction of Groot, the character Groot, who you know probably from being on Guardians of the Galaxy. And originally, this was just a little one-shot monster presentation story. And Stan Lee wrote a bunch of these, and his team wrote a ton of monsters. They had monsters every month it was their big thing until they came up with, decided to go with Fantastic Four, and we'll get more into that in Fantastic Four. But it's funny because Fantastic Four also features a giant monster, which I think they just went ahead and did probably because their monster books would do well for them. So as we go through this, I'm going to be going through it with my son Hunter, who's joining us. And Hunter, how old are you now?
21.
21. He's 21. And we're going through it with his girlfriend, Alicia, who might be here and might not be here. I think she's disappeared for the moment.
I'm here.
She's
here.
Okay. I think she's cooking food at the same time. So she'll be in and out. But Alicia is, what are you now, 20?
Yes.
Yes. So I'll be talking with them. I just had my birthday and I'm 57. So we also have some other folks who will be joining us in future episodes that are going to represent a broad variety of age ranges. And I thought that would be interesting to get everybody's thoughts on this. So I guess we'll start off with Groot. Alicia, what did you think of the Groot story? And he's very much, you can tell by the cover right here, he says, "Behold, I am Groot the Invincible who dares to defy me."
Yeah, you'll pretty instantly notice a few key differences between this and his verbose than later representation.
Later, yeah. He still has the
he's also
Groot in there, which is
that's
good.
True.
But it's surrounded by other words, so he can definitely, somehow he lost his ability to...
And now, you may not have noticed this. He also is holding a car in his foot, meaning he's also slightly taller than Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yes. He in the comic at some point they mentioned that he's 50 feet tall. I would think in this picture he's far more than 50 feet, considering that truck.
Comparing it to the people around him, too?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think he's more like 75 or 100 feet tall in the picture. And that's a wonderful cat you have there, Alicia. I'm surprised I'm just letting you pick it. It's a her, right?
Yes.
Pick her up. Anyway, Alicia, what did you think of this story, or what things did you notice from the story that were interesting of?
A lot of the times when I'm reading the comics like this, I notice kind of like the littler like cultural things. So after I finished, the first thing that I said to Hunter was like, wow, like this wife is terrible.
Yes. I was noticing the same thing.
Berating his masculinity like the entire time, and it's played as way more of like he's finally like masculine at the end, and it's just kind of like it's really strange the way that it's played as like, oh, he finally did something that ended up being traditionally masculine, which is defeating the monster with termites. But he doesn't even do it in hi cat. He doesn't even do it in a classic superhero way.
Yeah, he doesn't like go grab an axe and chop up Groot or something.
Which I think is good in that the storyline is about him needing to be more masculine, needing to be more like other guys. And then at the end, it is essentially saying it's okay. I mean, he found another way to be masculine, or another way to fix the problem. And they talked about how it's because he's a scientist and you guys aren't scientists, and he was able to figure this out. So boosting scientists, I thought it had interesting sort of ramifications on today, in that scientists are seen not in the best light by a lot of people these days. And I think that this presents the scientist as being a smart guy who goes through and figures out how to solve this problem. But he has to deal with the fact that his society doesn't respect him very much, and his girlfriend doesn't respect him very much either throughout the course of this, but he still perseveres and figures out a solution to the problem. But so I found that to be kind of redeeming in the story, and surprising in a, whatever it was, 8-page story or something. I didn't think it'd have that cultural through line in it. And that was the most interesting part to me, far more interesting than Groot was, actually. Hunter,
Yeah,
definitely interesting seeing the that one particular line that you were talking about, where it's like, that's because he's a scientist and you're just a sheriff.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, in particular, like the scientists and policemen are both like interestingly polarized figures in modern discourse. So seeing that just kind of be thrown in as like, haha, like smart guy figured something out that you couldn't, and not being like, you know, a strong political statement was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if this story was presented today as a new story, and they kept the script the exact same way, but just said, "Hey, somebody just wrote this," I would go, "Oh, this is a commentary on current politics and current," because it just seemed like it was almost too on the nose, putting scientists against the sheriff sort of thing.
The cop's immediate solution is just to shoot at the thing.
Right. Yeah. Well, and when we have certain sheriffs that have come out as being really right-wing and so forth, and all of that lately, I just think,
where did the sheriffs get all those torches from?
Yes.
From their Klan rally?
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, Hunter, what did you think of this?
So speaking of the ending of the story, with using the termites instead of fighting it, I was thinking it'd be really great if the MCU would look at that as an example of having a different ending to it.
Yeah.
Because I started thinking about what MCU projects have had an ending that wasn't just the two of them duking it out.
Right.
I think Doctor Strange is the only one.
Of movies? Yeah.
And and I think the movies could definitely gain in that area.
I feel like it's definitely a thing that you see, we're going to keep on seeing in comics, is often, I wouldn't say often, more frequently than you see in other forms of media, where the solution ends up not just being a brawl.
Yeah.
And it's
I can't remember if Stan Lee, you're right, in lots of comics they don't have that happen. With I'm not sure if Stan Lee, because he's going to be the person we're focusing on most of the time.
Well, we're off to a good start. Yeah. We're off to a good start here.
We're off to a good start, except for the fact that he didn't write this one.
Well,
it's written by his brother, so
it's a Lee, so it's halfway there.
Close enough, you know.
Well, and he was the editor, I believe, at the time. So I mean, he probably had input into the story and things. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting story to start with, and I think, I don't know if the writer originally, the writer that created Guardians of the Galaxy and decided to use the character Groot that had been developed this time, was really thinking about this, but man, he really made a name for himself in that he like all of a sudden changed what the first superhero comic was for Marvel, and it became this Tales to Astonish number 13 that featured Groot. Because Groot was just a one-off character, and then he was used.
Well, I don't know. I feel like you could make an argument that you still shouldn't call this their first superhero comic.
Yeah.
Because it was not meant to. Like, you're not going to go look at Norse mythology and go, that was the first superhero comic because it has Thor in it.
Right. No, but I guess the other reason that gives it a little more power with that is, as we'll see, I think it's next week when we have Ant-Man's first appearance, it wasn't written as a superhero thing either. And he's definitely has the same name. He definitely is the same character. And they definitely think of it as his first appearance. And it's very similar in lots of ways to this Groot appearance. So we'll have to compare those two when we get to that issue. But yeah, I can definitely see arguments both ways. But he is currently part of their superhero team in Guardians of the Galaxy, and this is where he started out. So
can I say one more thing before we move on?
Of course.
I think so. I'm always on the cultural through lines. And yes. If your viewers get tired of it, they're gonna have to start skipping past my speeches.
We'll start flashing a disclaimer. Alicia is talking.
Alicia is talking about politics again. I just think that it's so interesting that they have the scientists come up with the termites as the end, considering that, like, I mean, they do make it a thing where it's like, oh, he basically like bioengineered these, but they don't say it like that. They say that he bred them, right. Which is very much like, I could absolutely see it being a plot point, a like slightly different plot where, the everyman is the one who comes up with the termites and right. Just, finding some termites and bringing them to Groot, whereas the scientists are the ones scrambling because their special root rot or like their specific, space weapons aren't working as Groot. Because I think that's what we've been seeing a lot more often recently is like the smart people are too smart. They don't know how to zoom in. Like they're just looking at the big picture. They're just right. Looking at their advanced knowledge. So I just think that is interesting because you could absolutely see the plot going in the same direction, but with like different heroes, and yes. with the same type of like, yeah, you're a scientist, but I'm a carpenter or something, something really, really simple like that. Because I feel like we're seeing a lot more of that type of plot point than the go scientist type of plot points nowadays.
Correct. Yeah, I don't think it would write it this way probably if it was today. The other thing is, it's refreshing to me always to read these old comics that only had 8-page stories in them, because they were just it's always interesting, how are they going to cram a whole story with a beginning, a middle, and an end into 8 pages, and they do that fairly effectively in this story. And they both DC and at this point, I don't think it was called Marvel. I think it was called Timely. But anyway, all the major publishers were mostly having very few comics that would be the character from beginning to end. It would usually be a little story with that character and then maybe a little story with a different character, or even it was all Superman. Like the Superman comics at this point, you'd read an 8-page Superman story. I think they had an 8 and a 12 and then another 8. And sometimes they'd use those as chapters to be one big story, but usually it'd be 3 separate stories. And that's just not done today. I would love to see a modern comic where somebody actually did an 8-page story, and seldom it's done. I mean, they do it sometimes.
You might be happy to know that that's starting to make a bit of a comeback on the DC side. I don't know what specific comics, but I think they have maybe 3 series at this point. Yeah. That are always having the last several pages being a separate story about a different character.
Mm-hmm.
So that's starting, maybe a bit of a nostalgia return for that.
Making a
comeback.
Because that was a big thing all the way up and pretty much until about the 80s, at least for, not in Marvel. Marvel would usually have 1 story per issue sort of thing. But over on DC's side, they would still have, your action comics, your adventure comics, whatever they were, would have a Superman story that was 12, 15 pages, and then a little 6 or 8-page Atom story or Green Arrow story or something like that in the back part of the book. And I used to love those. Sometimes they'd have some of the best artists doing the stories in the back of the book and some of the best writers. So it just depended. Anyway, we're getting off enough on this. So let's get to the next issue, which is Fantastic Four. And I'm going to adjust my background, and hopefully take us to the Fantastic Four, maybe, with any luck. So hopefully this changed for you guys. Did it change? Oh, good.
Yep.
So this is the first issue of the Fantastic Four. This is the cover of it, and I thought we'd talk about the cover for a little bit. How this came to be, essentially, the story is anyway. Stan Lee was tired of having to do comics and write the same stories he'd been writing. He'd been in comics for a long time as a writer and was going to move on to do something else. And his wife said, well, before you leave, why don't you do one of the comics you constantly for 10 years have been telling me about the comic you'd like to write. So why don't you write one the way you want to write it and then see what happens. And then if that doesn't catch on, then leave. But give it a try. And so he came up with the Fantastic Four. And this was the issue that he wrote after that conversation. And it definitely caught on and sold enough that they kept on producing more. Now, having said this, you got to realize at the time, superheroes, sort of after World War II, had kind of died out, and most of the superhero comics stopped being published. There was still Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman were being published, but pretty much everything else was horror stuff or teen stuff like Archie comics, that sort of thing. And then in 1956, in 1955, they put on the Comics Code and made it really difficult to write horror stories anymore or war stories anymore. So those comics they couldn't make them anymore and get their approved by the Comics Code. So that had to do with Senate hearings that went on and everything. Anyway, so DC said, well, let's go back to superheroes again. So that's where we get the Silver Age. Within 56, we have the Flash coming out as a new comic, and the Atom reappearing quickly thereafter. And then they go with Justice League that combines the heroes, and we'll get into that a little bit as we move forward. So this wasn't as innovative as you might think. It was more or less kind of saying, well, heroes are doing okay over on DC stuff. Why don't we start doing some heroes? And they just thought, let's do them a little differently. And so we'll get into how they do them differently as we go. But this cover I love it because it ties in so many things and tells us so much about the comic and so much about what was going on in comics at the time. Like I mentioned, most of the comics at the time were, at least that Marvel was putting out, were these monster comics with giant monsters that would show up. So this continues that giant monster theme on the cover of this to kind of tie it into, so they weren't going completely in left field. They were sort of like, oh, look, this is still a giant monster one.
Yeah, you could replace this dude with Groot and it would be the same cover.
Exactly. So they're kind of going with what their meat and potatoes has been, but they're introducing a new element to it in the fantasticness of the other characters. On this cover, too, I love the fact that all the characters, you get the concept of who the characters are. I mean, it says big in little letters there, featuring The Thing, Mr. Fantastic, Human Torch, Invisible Girl, right? Together for the first time. So you know this is a first issue. You've got the fact that you get to see what all their powers are. You can see the Torch is in the middle of flying and he's got his power on. You can see that Invisible Girl is turning halfway invisible, so you can get the idea, okay, she turns invisible. The Thing you probably get the least amount of information on, other than he looks like a big blobby guy.
Well, he also is very strong. He's crushing the car with one hand.
Right, so you can see him crushing a car, right? And then you can see that Mr. Fantastic is all stretched out, so you can see what his power is.
I'm not going to lie.
One says the other one's like name in the title, so you can see who's who. They even give you the information of just wait and see, sister, says the Torch. So you know that they're sister and brother. That's communicated in the cover. I don't know how you would communicate more things on such a simple cover as this than they do. They really communicate a lot of information.
Well, you also immediately get a feeling for the Thing's personality in there.
Yes.
So where he's, sort of like, ugh, I gotta do this, fine.
Right.
Y'all can't handle this.
Yeah,
He's
you
sort
get
of
a
like,
little taste of the bickering that's going to come on, and that's going to be the big part of what the Fantastic Four is, because we haven't seen that in comics before. Alicia, did you have anything that struck you on the cover or anything? Or
Oh, you see Susan being a damsel in distress.
okay,
Which is, a little bit unfortunate, but
yes, agreed.
no, I agree that everyone's got their own little quirk of personality in their dialogue. It's not as flat as I feel like the Groot comic was, where everyone's just extremely verbose and like very much like, I will defeat you, villain. No, you will not defeat me, hero. Where this one's, everyone's got a little bit more personality to him.
Agreed.
They really did give Susan she's the only one that doesn't really have a combat related power.
Correct.
And she also was given the perfect power for being the damsel in distress, that being that she can hide really well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, they do eventually give her the force field power, which I don't know. Does she even have that in this first issue?
No, there's nothing in this issue to imply that she can do force fields.
Yeah. Now, which was smart to give her the force field power, and they probably were retconning and going, okay, well, let's look at this.
Well, they're probably thinking if they're having a fight, what is she going to do?
Right. Yeah. What did she bring to the fight?
I guess sneak up and punch him in the back.
Yeah. She's got sneaky power. That's it. Well, and unfortunately, you would hope they would learn the lesson and go, okay, so we're going to make her better over the years and things. But if you look at the movie that they created of this,
I would recommend you don't do that.
Yeah, they actually made her power even more sexist in a way. Because in this, you can see, just from this cover, she obviously can make her clothing turn invisible as well.
Yep.
Completely forgot about this part of the movie.
She always has to strip off her clothes as she turns into, at least at the beginning, she has to take off her clothes.
Such a big part of it.
And then the fun they have with it is always when she turns back, putting her in ridiculous situations where all of a sudden she has to cover up and she's in the middle of a crowd and she's...
It could be worse. She could be a high schooler, like one of the characters from My Hero Academia, which is a high schooler that is invisible but has to be naked the whole time.
Yeah.
She's also invisible the whole time.
That is true. She cannot turn visible again.
Right. Well, and I tend to think if you gave that, like The Invisible Man, for instance, the horror movie and things, and it's been redone a million times.
Main character from Hotel Transylvania, I'm aware.
At least in that case, it's a guy that has to deal with being invisible and being naked and things, and it's a whole different feel then. It's not a sexual thing as much as an embarrassing thing. When it's a woman and you're picking a very beautiful woman to do this, it's always going to have sexual connotations that you probably...
And that's what I liked about this comic, is it was very like, no, she's just a lady who turns invisible. Like there's nothing like, ooh, embarrassing or like, ooh, like sexy about it. She's just a lady who turns invisible.
Yeah. And I thought so too. I thought this comic was less sexist than later portrayals would be of this, though still we have the damsel in distress thing going on. That's probably our main problem. But let's tell you what, let's be done with the cover and let's move on to the story. I was struck by the story. I really was impressed with a lot of it. It seemed like modern storytelling in certain ways. Certainly a lot of it wasn't, but the parts that struck me was just the layout of it, that it didn't start by saying, oh, here's the origin of these people from the get-go and go in a linear fashion throughout.
It did the starting in the middle of going, bet you wonder how we got here. Freeze frame sort of technique.
It starts by putting them all in kind of normal situations that you can empathize with. And they all have things that go on of them having to deal with their power and deal with ordinary people and their reactions to their powers and things. We get to see that, and it's a chance for us to get to know the characters. And then after that, they come to a logical point and they say, basically, well, here's how it started. And then they tell us their origin. And after they're done with their origin, that goes right into basically almost feels like a whole new issue of a comic where they take on the Mole Man, and that becomes the ending part of this comic. And so I thought, structure-wise, it was a pretty impressive structure for the time, and seemed like something you would see. You could basically take this structure and apply it to even if they were going to do a Fantastic Four movie. I mean, you could effectively, you're going to have to rewrite a lot of it, but you could take the structure and use it to create the movie and have the origin as part of it without it taking over the whole thing. Though I think maybe they should just, at this point, since the Fantastic Four has been done twice in movies, I think people are probably tired of the origin, and maybe you just take off with this series and eventually.
I feel like you might be able to do another origin movie for them.
Yeah, or
because like no one saw the rebooted one.
Yeah, probably.
And that one also was a different origin, too.
Right. And so I don't know. We'll have to see what they're going to do. Oh, the other thing I thought I'd point out too, really quick, is if you look at the top of the splash page, the fact that it says here they are, and it says who the characters are, so you know the characters' names to start out with. I'm a little surprised it didn't say Susan Storm, Invisible Girl, Johnny Storm, Torch, and so forth. It just gives them the characters' names, but not the superpowers or their superhero names. Speaking of names, I guess before we move on to the story a little bit more, what do you think about the names of the characters? Did you think?
All right, specifically about this,
Yes.
There is a page, the page where they all name themselves. It's them
Yes.
all putting their hands in the center, saying what their superhero names are. We got Human Torch. All right, that's what your power is.
Right.
Invisible Girl. Okay, that's what your power is. The Thing. Okay, that's what you were called when you got your powers. Okay, Mr. Fantastic. Okay, bud, it's the most full of yourself thing you can do here.
Correct.
Everyone else is like, these are my powers. Ben's like, ugh, I'm a monster. I'm the Thing. He's like, I'm so fantastic. It's like,
Well,
your friend got transformed.
Talking about, did it change on your end? Can you see the new page?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we got them all putting their hands on top of each other, right? And as they do this, like you said, it's exactly that. They're all, you can see this whole thing. It says, I'm calling myself Human Torch, and I'm with you all the way. Same for me, the Invisible Girl. There's only one still missing, Ben. And then Ben says, I ain't Ben anymore. I'm what Susan called me, the Thing. And then you get, and I'll call myself Mr. Fantastic, which is...
Then they go on to name their superhero team after Mr. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That was hilarious. But
he's got main character syndrome pretty bad on him.
Yeah. And so, but we'll get to more of that in the letters page, because I love how people picked up on it.
I love that. This was my thought when I was reading this book, and then we read the letters page. Someone else echoed my exact thought behind this. I was like, yes.
Yes, I agreed.
I'm not alone. Someone from the early 60s agrees with me.
Well, what else did we want to cover of the beginning? Was there anything that stood out in the beginning part where they're introduced to them?
Once again, Marvel likes to show cops in a negative light as they all attacked Ben immediately.
Yeah, definitely interesting.
Yeah.
It was also like you get like everyone else doing like the Thing like breaks through all these things, is like crashing and like smashing through stuff to get where it needs to go. Like the Human Torch just like melts the car roof while flying out, and then Invisible Girl's just like invisibly knocking over people while she runs through a crowd.
Yeah, yes. Why did she need to be invisible for this? Besides showing off that she has a power.
It's just like, it's just definitely like one of those things is like the Invisible Girl was the most like feminine power they could think of that would like allow her to still be a little bit dainty, for the time. Like she's still, heavily reliant on her her superhero partners and, you know, her man. Like she really can't, like I said, it's kind of like the where they give, you know, in the MCU, they put in Black Widow into the Avengers, and you've got all these superhero people, all these high-tech people, and then you have Black Widow, who's just a good assassin. And it's like the same thing that they do it with Hawkeye as well. So, you know, it's not completely just sexist, but it's they're trying to find, you know, the most dainty way we can have this woman in here.
Right. I think so too. And I think it's strange how all of a sudden she turns her power on and she becomes like a linebacker knocking all these people down.
Yeah.
You could still essentially try and avoid hitting every person because it's not like they did anything to you.
I don't know if I could bump into people with no consequences.
He's just running around like pushing people.
She's gone power mad.
Yes, that's what it looks like to me. Everybody else, they're using their powers to do something that they need to do at the time or whatever.
She's like, "Nah, well, I'm gonna push them.
I'm gonna push through all of them." I don't understand all of
But
that.
if you notice, she only pushed over the men. That's not true. There's a woman there. Forget I said that. She pushed over mostly men.
Mostly men.
These retaliation.
There's
one,
only
two,
one,
three, four men and one woman. And another woman, she sort of just left alone, though the woman's like shrieking or something, I think. She's about ready. She's freaking out.
Also, is this the first Black character we've seen in the background up here?
Oh, that is.
Yeah.
So we got to figure out this man's name. The first Black character in Marvel history.
Yeah, I don't think he has a
man sitting on the ground in the background.
Man who was pushed over by Invisible Girl.
Yes. He apparently was the first one pushed over. Or he was sitting on the ground to begin with.
What an honor.
Also, he's essentially in the back of the bus here. That's as far back as you can put it on the scene without being off screen. So, well, and then my question too is this the original comic, or is this a? I don't think this is. I think this is definitely a redone. It's recolorized, and so it'll be really interesting to see if the actual comic had that, because the one I read, I didn't read the one we're looking at, the one that's on my screen in the background. I read a different one, and I don't know. I'll have to go back and look and see. Was he a Black character the whole time, or did somebody later on come in and say, "Oh, that's no reason we can't do that guy"?
Let's have at least one in there.
Yes.
He can be in the back. Don't worry. He doesn't have to be too big.
Yeah. But we'll see. But it wouldn't surprise me too. I mean, Stan was definitely soon would head off in a direction that was certainly featuring more Black characters than we'd ever seen.
He was a progressive man.
He was.
He
gave us the X-Men.
Yeah. And he gave us, and we'll get into this later, we'll start sharing his soapboxes and things that he would do in later issues, probably starting in 67 or 66 or something like that, and shared a lot of things about treating people all equally and all the civil rights sort of things, and a little bit about the war and that sort of thing. So anyway, and some of the comics covered the war stuff too in a deeper way, maybe a richer way than had been done in the past, maybe. So yeah, we'll see. All right, so we get through this part where we get introduced to all the characters. We get the part about their origin, which we won't go through much other than just say
they flew up in space and got hit by cosmic rays.
Yeah, and
that part was.
My question is, how do you steal a space capsule sort of and all of a sudden launch? I think it takes a lot of people to launch.
I feel like it would be easy to steal if one of your team members is invisible.
Yes.
And if one of
then again, they weren't
was
invisible
a
at
part
the time.
of the team who designed or helped create in general, the ship or whatever.
Which they did. So I'll accept that as well. I was thinking the same thing. I guess you could justify it that way. And then what do we think about the Mole Man coming on the scene and that change at the end of the comic? Apparently Alicia was bored with it because she's yawning. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I'm just making the face that he made, actually.
Yes, okay, you're copying the mole man makes you yawn because he was
that is not the mole man though.
no, well, not the mole man, but the creature.
It's the mole man's creature, yeah. I was very surprised. I mean, if you want to pull up a picture of the mole man, I was surprised at how not mole-like he was.
Corner, but,
or how he's really mole-like. I don't know. It was just interesting seeing that his backstory is essentially like, I am so ugly that my life is ruined.
He was the first incel. Yeah,
which is a very interesting, like, it's not even just that like there is a subset of people, I guess it's like a subculture, I suppose. Is that what you would call it, Hunter?
Yeah.
A subculture, on the internet, mostly meeting on the internet, but who like wholeheartedly believe that it's mostly men, and mostly like men who have not had our cat is screaming at the door right now. Mostly men who have not had like just a great time in life, or specifically a great time in their romantic endeavors. So it was interesting, like those people wholeheartedly believe a lot of the times that like attractiveness determines your outcome in life, and that ties into like a lot of eugenics type things, where it's like if your genes are not good, you literally cannot have a good life. Mm-hmm. And so it was just interesting seeing this, because it was like, like there are people who like today would look at this and are like, so true. Like they look at this and they see it as like,
Well, on the page I've called up, you can see right there the woman says, "What? Me go out with you? Don't make me laugh." She's saying, and then,
but it's not even just and it's not even just like the woman is like, you're gross, I don't really want to date you. And then you have employers turning him away, and then he's getting bullied, and like he just decides like, I'm gonna go to, where does he go? Well, he goes to the center of the earth, but it's essentially Antarctica, right? Like he goes to this, far off place that no one else is going, and you're just kind of like, the pieces in my head, they're there, not really seeing why you put them together in that section. He's just kind of like, everyone was mean to me, so
I'm gonna go to Antarctica.
Moving to like Nebraska or something, or like just moving to another town. He's like, I'm leaving society completely. Right. Yes, Kat. It's just an interesting thing to just dedicate yourself to, and to see as like somewhat of a valid backstory.
Right. And then and then his backstory is, as he falls, he gets hit and essentially goes blind, and then learns to deal with that, and somehow commands all the creatures that he finds underground, and becomes really good at fighting while blind, which is, you just have to accept that as a leap of faith. And it's like,
I mean, it's essentially the Daredevil powers. Construct.
Yeah. But without the radioactive thing hitting his face. So
no, so he just got hit by a rock and went blind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that like really helped him out in the long run.
But we have to say, do not try that in real life. It won't work.
Well, I don't know. Maybe if you got the right rock.
What is the podcast called?
To be determined.
Still working on it.
But when it's uploaded to YouTube, it'll have a name.
Yeah,
exactly. Benny and Co. does not condone slamming a rock against your head in order to go blind and
That's correct.
No, sorry. This only works. Okay, the rock against the head only works if you're in Antarctica. So go to Antarctica, then hit yourself with a rock.
This is the center of the earth.
Actually. Sorry, go to Antarctica, find the hole that takes you to the center of the earth, then hit your head with a rock.
Okay. Well, and
we condone doing that.
I think we're going to go with like Marvel Mayhem or something like that, because I always talked about Mayhem in Manhattan as stories and things. So I like Marvel Mayhem, but we'll see. So, and we'll see if anybody tunes in and listens and watches or whatever. We'll kill.
Don't worry, I'll spend $300 on getting ads for us.
Oh, that's a great idea.
That'll work well.
So
Anyway.
back to our story. I think he's an interesting character to bring into this. I think his origin is interesting as well. I think it's part of what Stan Lee does so well is he brings us people that already had problems, and this person had this problem that he just didn't fit into society, and so then his way of dealing with it is to exile himself, and then he becomes the ruler of this underground thing, and he calls himself the Mole Man. So it's I can't. There's not too many villains that have such a deep, resonant background as this, and so I think that's great. And
it's got to be one of the, it's a good sympathetic backstory. Quite honestly, like within the canon, maybe outside of the canon, you're a little bit kind of like, well, I don't really. Are you sure that you were that ugly?
Right.
But within the canon, like if you can't get hired somewhere, like that's if you're unable to gain employment, that's definitely enough to push people to go to the center of the earth.
Yes.
And
something also about him that I'm interested to see as we get more and more first issues is seeing the villains from each of the first issues and how they are in later of the series. Because Mole Man is a joke character in later. He barely shows up when he's a joke. When if you look at the first X-Men villain is Magneto, right?
Right.
Who is, their villain for the rest of the time. It'll be interesting to see how the first villain in each series sort of shakes out in the history of those characters.
And you won't have to wait too long in this series because, of course, Doctor Doom is probably definitely the biggest villain to come out of Fantastic Four. And I think he shows up within the first 6 issues, somewhere in there. So we'll have to see. But yeah, and we'll see what happens with Mole Man as he comes back, if he comes back.
Imagine how Fantastic Four comics would be different if Mole Man was the main villain forever.
Well, if you wrote him correctly, he could be a good main villain. I mean, anybody you write correctly could be something big. Also, I've never thought of him as being all that small of a guy, physical stature-wise. But when you look at this picture at the top of the screen here of Reed pulling him away, he looks like a little kid. So
he's like 3.5 feet tall at most.
Yeah, in that picture anyway. I don't know if that's indicative.
Speaking of that picture, Reed and Susan.
Yes.
Was this this wasn't they went into this knowing that this wasn't going to be their costumes long run, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Because by issue 2, they have their normal costumes.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
All right. So I was wondering if maybe they made this, and then were they going, we can't have those be their outfits?
Right.
Or if they went into this like, it's their first appearance. We want them to be the sort of every person heroes. We don't want them to start with superhero costumes already made.
Correct. I don't know why they did it, but I think it was a good choice. I mean, so often we get a hero and we get introduced to their costume and everything in that first issue. I think it's kind of refreshing to have them just kind of in work sort of clothes that they go and do this first issue in, and then later decide on what their costumes are going to be and so forth.
And the MCU has been doing well with the first costumes being significantly worse.
Yes.
Like with, I was going to say both the Spider-Mans. So Spider-Man, Tom Holland Spider-Man, and then out of the MCU, but Miles Morales Spider-Man, where they both kind of, Tom Holland's has just a hoodie and some goggles, and then Miles Morales has, the old Spider-Man's like costume, like a children's costume, and then he ends up putting a hoodie over it and actually designing it himself, but it's not a specially tailored spandex. It's their own little personal thing.
Why does superpowers always come with super tailoring skills?
Yeah. Well, and the first original Spider-Man for the movies. Though it wasn't, like you say, it wasn't MCU either.
Tobey Maguire's, yeah.
Yeah, right. They had Tobey Maguire. His first costume was very much a self-created one to be a wrestler in, and that sort of thing. And so it was a very homemade thing that eventually worked out the kinks. So yeah, I always think that's a great idea. I don't think you're going to get everything right the first time, and so I think growing into it is a good idea. I like the way that this introduces us to the characters, but then leaves some room for growth on their part. So yeah, I thought it was I could see how it could be a very effective first issue. So I liked it. Well, what about you guys? Did you generally like it? I guess we've talked a lot about positive. What are there some negatives that go along the way? I mean, it wasn't the most sophisticated writing I've ever seen, but
yeah. Well, yeah, this is just a thing with Stan Lee's writing, but I think the overuse of, I don't know what I call them, the setting bubbles, the yellow bubbles, basically.
Yes.
Bit on the wordy side on those. It's not nearly as bad as it was in the Groot comic, because that one wasn't written by Lee, but
right.
It's still
It's definitely one of those things where with the advent of, I mean, not just digital digital art, but also just with the development of comics as a medium, they've gotten comic artists have gotten a lot better at being able to actually convey, what is going on in their art, and not just having to be like, okay, so we're in Manhattan and this is, they're gonna draw the Empire State Building instead, or they're just getting a lot better at not needing the narration to set their scene.
Especially when it comes to characters showing emotion.
Yeah.
They're much better at having just drawing the emotion instead of having to go, ooh, fear races across Mr. Fantastic's mind as he stares into the incomprehensible void of the mole man's nose.
Yeah.
Yes. Part of that is Stan Lee, though, and just his style of writing was to be very verbose and descriptive. But you're right. Later on, they moved away from that. You don't even have the editorial captions in some comics at all anymore, and it's just all word balloons and the drawings. And then certainly there's been issues that have very few word balloons, and it's mostly just the drawing that conveys everything. I will say that the art in this was Jack Kirby, and Jack Kirby is considered one of the best action artists that there's ever been. And I still think the way he makes every scene feel like there's movement involved in it is pretty impressive. And
I think he's great as the action scenes. I think it's the setting the scene, I guess. That's the biggest thing. And that's where Jack, I guess, where Kirby and Lee work so well together, because Lee was like, oh, don't worry, I would love to take over that job for you. Like, I will handle all that. You just handle the action.
Yes.
Because writing action is something that a lot of writers struggle with as well.
Yeah. And I think that's just sort of the deal they more or less struck, and it worked for them. And certainly it worked for the audience at the time. Because if you look at other comics from the time, characters will just be standing a lot of the time, and they almost look like mannequins, and then they have word balloons there where they're talking to each other, but there's no feeling of motion. And it's difficult in a static picture to get feeling of motion going on, and yet he can pull it off. So go ahead.
Another complaint I remembered the two of us had was the scene, or basically our problems with Ben's personality in this. Right. Specifically the part where they get their powers, and then he goes to attack Mr. Fantastic and says to Susan, I'll show you how a real man does things. And it was just a weird, just such a toxic way for him to act.
I mean, it's not an issue with the character as much as it's just interesting that, like,
he's changed quite noticeably.
Yeah, like I'm just I don't think you said this yet, but I don't know that much about comics. So like coming from this as being like, oh yeah, I watched the Fantastic Four movie like 10 years ago, you know, I'm just thinking like, oh, was there like this weird, like, you know, almost like one-sided romantic subplot between like the Thing and Susan Storm? But it's like, it's very much just, they turned him into such like a sympathetic hero where it's like, oh, he's like, he's, you know, this and that, and like, oh, feel bad for him because he looks like this, and you know, uh, and they get into that a little bit where it's like he's literally like the Thing, you know, like nobody, he's unable to, you know, live in human society without getting shot at, and like he can't even buy clothes that fit him besides, you know, that big old trench coat and then his like weird underwear thing. But he's always just he doesn't react to it as like, woe is me, like this sucks. He reacts to it like, this sucks, I'm mad about it.
Right.
Which is something that like I definitely like, I kind of like the I like the diversity and personality there with you know, Reed Richards being the mild-mannered scientist, and then this guy not just being a hothead, just being like kind of rude. Like he's rude, like he's like rude to his teammates. He's just mean at certain points, and like they're still kind of just like, yeah, well, you look like that, so
Right. Well, I think Stanley, for whatever reason, kind of wanted to show that both in the Groot story that we saw earlier and in this story and in future things he did as well, that the smart guy can get the girl. The smart guy can solve things. The smart guy has things to offer to society that the strong guy doesn't have. And maybe they're more subtle things that you don't pick up on, but he's an important person.
He knew his target demographic.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the part that Stan also gave us in this story two different ways, and I can't think of future stories that give us this necessarily, but I don't love it, is the fact that, oh, if you're ugly, you're never going to find a girl for you. You're not going to fit into society. You're going to have problems, because both the Mole Man has that, and then when the Thing turns into the Thing and not Ben Grimm anymore, all of a sudden he can't. Oh, you'll never be able to get a girl, and you're never going to fit into society.
Yep.
And he doubles down on it in future issues when Ben gets a girlfriend, but his girlfriend is blind, because I can't imagine him being with someone who could actually see and choose to see the heart of this man or his personality as winning them over and saying, okay, I can still be with this person. But to me, that takes away, what about the people that are in wheelchairs, or people that are quadriplegic, or people that have other issues? Are they just never supposed to find love and never supposed to and yet they often do. You see stories of certainly they find someone who will love them even if they have some challenges, and you don't have to give up on life just because you have some challenges. And unfortunately, that looks like that one challenge of, man, if you're ugly, you're done for, is kind of the message you get from this, and that's not the best message.
It's definitely like dated in that sense, where I think it would be seen as a lot more either unrealistic or just not politically correct, in the sense of like, there are so many people who have whatever, various disabilities, various, you know, like maybe they're just ugly.
Yeah.
But they still, it's not like it's literally not like that ruins your chances at life. You know, most of the time really doesn't ruin your chances of getting a job. Like
Right.
that was also one of the things where I was just like, I mean, maybe maybe a receptionist, but that's a whole other issue. There is people hiring the pretty girl for the receptionist, but there's all these things where I think today it would be a lot more like, it would definitely be seen as like the mole, as we said, like the mole man is definitely, we see it today as more of like an incel type, like you're just kind of making up this oppression you have because you're ugly, where it's like you're being bullied, sure, but you're not, getting systemically oppressed to the point where you can't get a job. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to, because it's the thing that's most like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, go work in a warehouse. Like, they're like, like however you feel about Amazon's hiring and they'll take anyone, like it's very much like you don't really understand what they're going at. There are plenty of jobs that, they're not looking at your face and determining whether they want you to have you at the company and stuff. And then also just, it doesn't send a great message. And I think we think a lot more about the types of messages that we're sending our readers nowadays when it comes to subtext, where like, it's not like Stan Lee set out to be like ugly people cannot exist in society. He set out to just be like, hey, this thing sucks. Like, the mole man is still portrayed in a sympathetic light. The thing, however rude he is, he's still portrayed in a sympathetic light. But at the same time, like when you're portraying a society that clearly is supposed to mirror our own and is also terrible, you're implying something that's, really not a good message.
Yeah, agreed. Overgeneralizing. I think there are people that can see beyond those limitations, and they're showing that no one can see beyond those limitations.
Yeah.
No one can see beyond those challenges.
Unless they're blind, apparently.
Yes. That works. All right. Well, let's go through the letters page. As Hunter was saying, some of the letters page ties into some of the things we were thinking. So I'm just going to go with the first one. It says, and this, what I'm doing is I'm grabbing this letter page actually came out in issue number 3 of Fantastic Four, but it talks about issue number 1. So I thought it'd be more interesting if we did the letters pages that
we can see the fan reaction to this issue
at the time. Also, you're going to find that in some letters pages there are future writers and all sorts of things that come up as people writing the letters. So it's kind of fun to see where they started out. Anyway, the first one says, Dear Editor, I think the Fantastic Four will become a great success. The Thing and the Torch are very new and different. I would also like to know what the name of your artist is. And then he goes, and then when Stan Lee answers him, or whoever was set to answer him, I think it was Stan Lee at the time that was answering the letters, he says, well, Jack Kirby signs everything all over the place, so his name's Jack Kirby, of course. And then he also says, well, what do you think we are, chopped liver because we're a success now or something? And it's like, well, on your first issue, you're probably not yet considered a success. I wouldn't think. It could go either way. But the kid was right who wrote this in, that it would be a successful comic. Hunter, when I read this, and he's saying that that's about the Thing in the Torch, do you think those were different characters than comics had seen up until that point? Probably.
Well, hadn't we had the Torch already? He was in a couple stuff, but I mean, he was an android in those original ones. But so I don't know if you can call him a new character when he'd been in comics before.
The way I read this isn't so much their power is interesting, and it could be written that way. I was thinking of the character. I was thinking of
their attitudes and personality.
He's a real hothead.
Okay,
and
they're heroes that aren't the Captain America, I do what's right sort of hero.
Because usually you end up with a whole team, essentially, of Captain Americas, at least with his attitude. And so it's neat to have people that don't have that same attitude a little bit. And hi, Kat.
Lily.
Alicia, were you struck at all by the attitude of the
Oh yeah, I mean that's what
personality?
I was a bit of what I was saying before is like where when you see the very stark difference between the Groot issue and this issue, just between, you know, the hero not the heroes having personalities and not just kind of being like, I must defeat you, evil scum, and
Right.
then, you know, like they've had like
They
I said,
stand
like,
for what's right and honest and true, and that's who I
yeah.
am. Yeah, right.
And like as much as I might not like Ben Grimm if he was a real person, like I like that he has a bit of a personality. Like
See, the one I dislike probably the most is Johnny Storm, just because he's that cool guy, hothead. I don't have to treat people well or anything like that because I'm good looking and I've got a cool power and everyone's going to love me. But I think that's an honest portrayal of the way some people might be with that. And I think it's interesting to show a different character with different facets. And then the fact that he's not completely that because he has a sister that he cares about. So they have some humanity shining through. They're not making characters that you cannot like, but they are giving them some personality flaws that comics haven't previously given to characters. And I think that's refreshing.
absolutely.
Okay.
Agreed.
All right. Well, let's read on. I'll skip to where's the next one I wanted to read.
Ooh,
You want to read the next one?
Is that the next one? Is that's the one we're looking at? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "Dear editor, the best thing about this comic is the character conflicts. So already in issue 1, people are seeing that there's character conflicts that they enjoy.
Picking up on what's setting this apart from DC superheroes.
Yep. I think it's great. It's nice to see a group of superheroes who aren't unnaturally buddy-buddy. The cover of number 1 is pretty poor," he says. "It didn't stand out. I wish the name of Mr. Fantastic were different. It sounds too much like Mr. Clean." I love
King.
that.
He is so Rick Wood from Cambridge, Massachusetts. If you are out there, okay, if you're out there, you're my hero. Okay, you're the best person from this book. You're not even a character in the Fantastic Four, but you're the best part of the Fantastic Four. Rick Wood from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I love you.
And I'm impressed that they would print a letter that's negative. A lot of times comics wouldn't. Every letter would be positive. In fact, a lot of times the editors would write their own letters because they weren't getting enough fan letters, so they'd write some of their own things, a thing they wanted to talk about. Like letters that would say, "When is so-and-so coming back?" And then they would say, "Oh, actually, what a surprise. Coming back next issue, you can see this character come back." And obviously it was a letter that was written just so they could talk about the character in the next comic. But go ahead.
Also, he mentions how the cover doesn't stand out. And this is the downside to what we're talking about, how it's a monster cover, because that's what they're used to.
Yes.
It makes it where it just blends in with all the other monster books. At a quick glance, you go, "Oh, big monster guy, okay, move on." It's not until you start analyzing it like we did, of looking at the people and their dialogues, you start noticing what makes it different from the other covers.
Well, and you start wondering, is letters like this what made them think, oh, maybe we should give them costumes, because maybe they originally weren't going to give them costumes. I don't know. But giving them all a similar costume probably made it stand out more as well. So, yeah, I thought interesting. But for me, I thought the cover was a standout cover, I guess in more of the ground it covered, like we said, and not so much as the cover being
the art itself.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think
I do want to talk about the character conflict thing. Because I think it's interesting how we're really trying to, well, not we, but a lot of the directors today, when it comes to, yes, Kat, when it comes to, don't claw me. When it comes to superhero movies, is they want to try and emulate that. And a lot of the times it feels a little bit unnatural. A lot of people disliked Civil War. Avengers, or not, no, it wasn't Avengers, it was Captain America Civil War, because they felt like it was boring and it felt like kind of forced and natural. I think that it was boring, but it was not, I don't think that it was forced. I think that there's always been like with, you know, having Iron Man and Captain America, there's going to be, you know, a scraping of personalities. Like when they, you know, at their heart and soul stand for different moral directions. Of course, there's going to be differences. And so I think that was it was okay, like rendition of, you know, the infighting of a superhero group. But then you look at things like Batman versus Superman, or, you know, not to hate on Zack Snyder, but Zack Snyder films where they very clearly are trying to force a divide between the Justice League, where you really can't understand as much what he's trying to do, considering that Superman has always been the very, like, he's a stand-up guy because he's a stand-up guy. Like, he's a stand-up guy because he wants to be a stand-up guy.
He's the guy that will save a cat from a tree.
He's the guy that will save a cat from the tree, you know, when no one's looking. Like, he's always been the good guy, and trying to, you know, act like he would be, you know, actively hostile or just, you know, not a good teammate is very much like he'd be the perfect teammate. That's the whole point. That's why he's the leader, is because he's a great teammate. He gets along with everyone. And so in this one, you see like you can already see not the divide forming, but just the bickering between the Fantastic Four. And you can see how, like, if they wanted to turn it into a division between the team, you could understand why it's happening. Like, you could understand, like, oh, Johnny is too much of a hothead. Like, there's issues. There might be like an intermarital, well, I guess it's interrelationship right now because they're not typically married, between Reed Richards and Susan Storm. There could be that. Ow, the cat is really just tearing up my back right now. Like, the Thing is, you know, just sick of the way he's treated in comparison to the other heroes. Like, you can see all this divide already that, you know, oh, it'd be interesting if they went into that. Whereas when you're looking at a Superman comic, you're really not thinking like, it would be sick if he was mad at somebody that was on his side, wouldn't it?
Right.
Whereas here, you're kind of like, you're really like, the character conflicts are something that you could see be turned into an interesting spin-off.
And they do play on that later on for sure. I think your point about Civil War is interesting in that the essentially what you have is you have Captain America, who's believes that the way all the choices you make, everything you do needs to be congruent, and it needs to all be heading in the same direction of showing who you are as a person and your beliefs. So the means justify the end in that it all has to work together. Whereas Tony has always believed in shortcuts to get you where you need to go, and the ends justify the means. And so you don't, as long as the end comes out and the good wins, that's fine. And for a while you can think your morals and things can take a back seat. Well, that is not within Captain America's belief system. And so that's why those two can definitely be seen butting heads, and it makes sense. As you say, really doesn't make sense with Batman and Superman butting heads all the time, in that they both think that you need to do what's right, and you need to Batman might have be willing to treat villains worse than Superman's willing to treat his villains and things, but it's a very subtle difference compared to the differences that Iron Man and Captain America have. So
Yep.
and that's DC drew themselves into this whole box
Yep.
70 years ago, 80 years ago when they were creating these characters, but then all the characters were created that way. Whereas Stan Lee's, all of Marvel Comics, the benefit they have is that all their characters were made in the 60s when there was a little more nuance to writing and things than there was back in the 30s and 40s. So,
which is why I don't know. Is it still called Vertigo?
Vertigo doesn't exist anymore.
Okay,
it got shut down last year.
But there's things like Vertigo.
Yes, DC
Vertigo adjacent, but DC.
Yeah, they replaced it with like DC Black Label is their current offshoot.
Yeah. Why those types of offshoots are the ones that are producing not like the heavy sellers, but the ones that like the people who do like them love them.
Yes.
People who do like them are like, this is literally one of the best things that I've ever read. You know, when you're producing things like Sandman off of Vertigo, like that has like legitimate nuance, like characters that are incredibly interesting, and a lot of them, and like you have actual moral dilemmas and actual changes in morals throughout the story, or you're seeing flashbacks where you're seeing different morals and stuff like that, and actual self-reflection on characters who, you know, it's very clear that they're saying like they weren't always good, where you really can't do that with, you know, the older Batman and Superman. You can't say that Superman was rude, was a bully in high school. You know, that's just not, it doesn't fit into his character at all. Like if you wanted to, like, sure, you can try, but it's really hard to make people love Superman in the way that they do by trying to make him, you know, too nuanced, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let me read one more letter. We won't go through all the letters, but we'll read this last one just because I think it's interesting. And that they would even publish it because it's such a negative letter, but it just shows that they're willing to publish anything. It says, "Dear editor, just finished reading Fantastic Four and must admit to being disappointed. I expected better things from team of Lee Kirby. Jack is capable of better artwork. I thought the artwork was fine to me. And the Thing ought to revert to human form at will as his teammates do." I think he's completely wrong there because I think it gives
that's what makes the Thing
interesting different issue in that if you could turn even into an ugly monster that could do all kinds of powerful things and turn back at will, you wouldn't have all the issues that he deals with, the stuff that makes the Thing.
You know, I think would be really cool if Daredevil wasn't blind. I feel like that would really help improve the character. You know, remove anything that might make them interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, certainly it would be interesting to see what would happen, how the comics would, you know, because the What If series is coming up here soon for Disney Plus viewers, where you're going to see what happens with different things worked out differently. I think it'd be interesting if Human Torch could not turn off his power and he was just constantly on fire. How would he go about his life? How would that be different? And maybe the Thing, if the Thing could change back at will, they're the only two I can think. Or if you made Invisible Girl, I guess, invisible all the time.
I was about to say, like, that is it's not a big part of, again, the manga anime My Hero Academia. She's just a side character, but there is discussions around her character where it's like she's an incredibly peppy character, and there's been discussions that's like, you ever think about how, you know, the whole reason that she might be so like, hey guys, pay attention to me, is because she's invisible, and like that's gotta be, whether it's, you know, the author being like, okay, how can I get this character in here? Because again, she can't just be a background character in the way that everyone else is. Like, you've got to get a speech bubble in there so that people can be, oh yeah, okay, she's still here.
Yeah.
Where
they draw the character that you're talking about, do they draw her like Sue Storm where you can see her?
There's just nothing.
Or is she just not there?
They just draw the clothes that she's wearing.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think they ever talk about
Her superhero costume is just a pair of gloves.
I was about to say that. I don't know if they ever confirm that she's fully naked because again, she's a high school girl. But I just like to imagine that it's made of her hair or something, so that she's not fully naked all the time.
Yeah, her hair's a little too. So they could definitely cut that and then weave it into like a unitard.
You could. So I'd rather imagine that they do that. Okay. But they draw her as just her clothes.
But knowing how he draws other characters, she's probably nude.
we don't need to get into manga and the sexualization of teenage girls. That's
not yet. In future, when Marvel is the first publisher to colorize a manga and distribute it in the United States, then we can talk about it.
Then we can get into that one. But like whether the author intended like, oh, we just gotta like remind the audience that she's here, or if it's an actual, you know, like this character would be, you know, like outward and peppy and like she wouldn't want to be invisible. Like imagine being invisible your whole life. Like you'd want to be seen. And like you wouldn't want people to forget you're there, so that's going to make you talkative, that's going to make you peppy, that's going to make you want to, you know, maybe like wear certain clothes that feel out there, like colorful and such. So, you know, if Sue Storm couldn't turn it off, like would her attitude be the same, you know, mild-mannered wife as she is, or would she be a lot more, you know, annoying for the 60s, you know? And I don't even know what a floppy Reed Richards who can't control his powers would look like.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just a man with no bones.
I mean, Reed essentially has his power on all the time because he can stretch and then assume shapes, and then he just assumes his normal shape most of the time.
I guess his power.
I felt about it. It's not like he has to turn on his power.
The adaptation for him, I guess you could do, would be he can't like lift anything that's of any significant weight.
He can just
without his arm just sort of bending.
Yeah. Well, except for that, your problem there would be then as a character, he loses a lot of his ability in fights. He's always been one to grab things and throw things and slingshot things. And all that, and none of that would really work.
That's what I'm saying. I think that would be like one of the only ways to have it be where he can't turn his powers off.
Oh no, having someone in the Fantastic Four who isn't useful in battle, if we do that.
Well, let me read the rest of the letter because the other part of it was interesting too, I thought. Then it says, the thing I read back to is normal too. Okay. The story also suffers from creeping monsterism, to paraphrase Gene Shepard. I don't know how that's paraphrasing Gene Shepard, but I do know Gene Shepard is the writer and narrator of the Christmas Story that folks might have watched, just so you know who we're talking about when he says Gene Shepard. Gene Shepard had all kinds of radio shows and things that are wonderful, and you can listen to Gene Shepard stuff if you go out to Internet Archive and look for Gene Shepard. He's a great storyteller. Anyway, then it says creepy monsterism that has dominated most, if not all, of your comics for some time. So that's the downside of using the monsters that they've used in the past. I personally think it was worth doing that as a bridge to between the two, to say, yes, we're the company that's produced all the giant creepy monsters that you're used to, but now we're doing a superhero book, but we're going to have a creepy giant monster in it to please you guys, and so you can connect the two together. I think it's okay, because I think this person could have had this argument about any of the other monster books that have been released recently. If Marvel had been releasing them for the past 3 years, I mean, those monster stories do get old. I would say this does not feature that monster very much, other than on the cover and in just a few panels. It's not like it's the main character in the story whatsoever. So
not even the main villain technically, since we've got Mole Man.
Yeah, it's not. It's
the henchman
creature or whatever. Yeah, it's his pet. So yeah. Anyway, I think
honestly, when I read that, it really just sounds like someone who related a little too much to the Thing. like Ben, the character, and was like, "Hey, why'd you do my boy like that? You bug me all the time."
Could be. I didn't even think about that. But it's neat to read these letter pages. Another letter in here, I won't read it, but it talks about how Johnny Storm, the Invisible Torch, should get his own series, and whether they listen to that or not, whatever. But in I don't know, 6 months we'll find, or something like that, Johnny will get his own series for a short period of time. It's like we were talking about earlier when they have multiple characters in one comic. Stan talks about all the different ones he's producing at this point in time. Besides Fantastic Four, he's writing and or editing Strange Tales, Tales to Astonish, Journey into Mystery, Tales of Suspense, and Amazing Adult Fantasy. And all of those are where they feature 2 or 3 stories within the same issue. So they're all 8 pages long or something. So they need things to fill those out. And so then they would take a character like Human Torch and give them their own little breakout stories that they would do. Then they kind of pulled back from that, which is too bad, because in the 80s and 90s, they go back to that with a limited series where you had 4 issues of, well, Scarlet Witch and Vision, for instance, that how they got their series basically on TV was from the fact that they had a limited series that they made in comic books. And other than that, those 2 characters would always just be in the Avengers. And so it let some characters breathe a little more when they could have their own series. And they did that with a number of the X-Men, a number of the Avengers, things like that. I wish they would have done that more in the 60s, had more breakout of the different characters that were in the group, but they did it a little, but not that much. But anyway, I think that covers everything for this week. But anything we didn't cover about Fantastic Four or Groot that anyone wanted to bring up, or are we good?
I just want to note this incredibly bold, incredibly bold letter that says, "Dear editor, you've got a heck of a nerve making a doll like Susan Storm invisible." To which the editor replied, "Listen, unsigned, with wolves like you around, she's better off that way." So I just like to think that unsigned from Dallas, Texas, he was very pleased when the movie came out and they made her and they turned her into what she is in the dominant culture now.
Yes, I would. Yeah, I could agree with that. I left out that letter because of that, because I was like, okay, that's kind of dated and sexist, but hey,
it's sexist, but it's historical.
It is
Historical record at this point.
Exactly. And anytime on any of these letter pages, if there's one that I haven't read that spoke to you guys, make sure that you share that one and share your insights. I think it's great. So, and I think these letter pages will give us a lot of things to talk about besides just the issues. So it's kind of cool. So anyway, I hope people enjoyed this. Next time we'll be back. We'll have Fantastic Four issue number 2, which came out the following month. Oh, by the way, this was November of 1961. And the next month or 2 months later, anyway, when the next Fantastic Four issue came out, then they had, I believe, Ant-Man will give us our first appearance as well. And so we'll usually be covering 2 issues for the next few months, and then eventually it'll branch out to 3 and 4 as we add more comics, as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby add more characters to the repertoire. But I think it's amazing how these have spawned so many films now, and people know the films but they don't know the comics. And I thought it might be fun to revisit these beginning stages of the comics that got us into these films. So anyway, thank you for joining me, Alicia. Thank you, Hunter, for joining me.
And if you guys want to read Fantastic Four along with us, we'll have links in the comments to the most affordable way to get access to these.
Yes.
I would not recommend buying the
affordable, some of them less affordable, but it just depends on what you want, because certainly
certain ones.
If you want to read a first printing of Fantastic Four #1, that one will not be affordable for you.
Yes, that will be very expensive. Also, if you want to buy the omnibus that has, I don't know, 100 issues in it, it's going to be a little expensive too, but the price per issue is not too bad. Yeah, there's lots of ways to get them.
We'll try and provide you a couple different ways of accessing the books.
Yes, and digitally, if you want to watch them that way,
Marvel Unlimited.
Be posting those for, and I think their Marvel charges 99 cents an issue or something, so that's not a bad way to do it either. So anyway, we'll post different ways, and you guys can get them any which way you wish. And we'll post the ones for next week as well, so you can hopefully read ahead. And as we spoil the issues as we're going through them, so you want to actually read them before we get to them, theoretically. So thank you for joining us, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Okay.